All right, well, we can get started. It's 10, so I guess we should uh, um, maybe briefly introduce ourselves. I don't think um, probably people that are tuning in, we're not strangers to people tuning
Hmm.
in, but so I'm Steve Paddon. I'm hoping to kind of interview Jared. Jared's has his own podcast, so he's done some interviews with people. So it's his turn to be interviewed.
Hmm.
Um, I'll plan to probably inject my own experiences as well as we navigate that. Um, and So I live in California and have two children. And Jared, go ahead, maybe briefly introduce
Yeah,
yourself.
I'm Jared Snyder. I grew up in Virginia in the church, and um, since 2024 of January, I've been living in Missouri and married after 21 years as a worker. So, um, yeah, uh, that's the short version, I guess.
All right, and full disclosure to the folks tuning in, I got my second shingles shot day before yesterday and been fighting that. So I'm not super clear cognitively myself. And Jared's been fighting the flu for like a week and coming off that. So we might not be the sharpest, our sharpest. it's, we'll give it a go.
It's a good thing to be able to hide behind anyway. Yeah.
Um, all right, so start with you, Jared. Like you've in the last like year and two and a half years, you've gone through some really radical changes about your definition of self, kind of in a from how people see you and how you see yourself. And you went from a worker in the two by two ministry to being a champion for survivors that was not really kind of put you on the outs while you were still in the ministry, and then you were quickly out of the church shortly thereafter. You became a husband and a stepfather, and now you're working on kind of a different training for a different type of spiritual advisor role. At least that's something you're interested in pursuing, and you're actively training on that. Those are some radical, huge transitions in a matter of just a couple of years after spending decades in a very rigid framework and definition of self. How has that been? Like that's how have you navigated that?
Yeah. Oh, brilliantly all the way through. Yeah. No, I, yeah, I definitely had no idea like how much I was taking on within it was just happening. Um, and in some ways, some of those changes had just been waiting to happen as far as maybe leaving the ministry, leaving the church, deconstructing those things I'd just been pushing them back. It was like a process that was demanding to happen. Um, but yeah, even like relocating what part of the country I was living in. Yeah, getting married, um, trying to work and make money, which hadn't been a concern either. Um, I I think the adrenaline from just being angry about the church and having a lot of people to talk about it with, kind of distracted me from the the burdens that were on their way, like the weight of them that was eventually going to come resting on me when all the excitement died down. So yeah, definitely more recently I've been navigating some of that where life has quieted down, and yeah, realizing all the previous scaffolding all the previous scaffolding came down, and now the weight of these things is just resting right on me with no scaffolding. Um, it's yeah, the reality of all that is it's a lot to grapple with.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's I think that's a big part of why these communities have been so appealing to people because it's like we can crowdsource how to navigate some of these things that we're kind of we all experience that scaffolding fall down. And as my wife described it, she described the deconstruction of like reaching up and feeling like I can find a foothold or a grab, and then that having that grab whatever she was grabbing onto would turn to sand, and then she'd reach to another thing, and that would turn into sand. It was just this free fall that nothing she'd grab onto that she thought was safe, and end up holding anything, and it's this is a scary, very difficult experience to go through. Um, So I want to transition kind of like some of that, what that looks like. Like this weekend, we met with a couple that have left as well in around the same time frame, and I was almost in some ways kind of an out of body experience as I observed myself and my wife talking to them, and we initially did the echolocation that you typically have inside the church, which is, hey, who do we know in common, and who your family connections, and trying to pigeonhole people in based on who you know and your connections. And it felt kind of gross, after as they're doing it was almost like habit, like that's how we we interact.
Mm-hmm.
And then so they kind of like, oh, let's not do that. So then we moved into this phase of like talking about our mutual experience of deconstructing, um, and how we um, had this shared experience and it was a therapeutic conversation. But it again, after a while, was like, ugh, this feels yucky too, because this is not how I want to define myself. I don't want to define myself as somebody that's been in the church, when I don't want to define myself as somebody that was in the church. Like I want to move forward and get to define what that is. And so that's how the conversation then did transition to, what our plans for our future, what our hopes and dreams were, and it felt like, oh, okay, this is finally starting to look and feel like what it should be, something that's more comfortable and kind of this open blank canvas to draw on. And so I'm curious your reaction of those kind of experiences as well, how you've navigated trying to redefine and not get stuck in the framework that we've had in the past.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It sounds like maybe you've had more success at that than I have. But, you know, uh, like in the, in the church, you come to realize I was in this role where I was on a pedestal I didn't belong on. And then, maybe, um, because of people's interest level in hearing stories from a worker, maybe even in X2 by2 circles, maybe there was some amount of pedestal that I didn't belong on, or my voice carried, more weight than it should have, maybe, because I'm just a guy running his mouth, essentially, and so I think, and maybe though, because of how much that's just everything you are and everything your life is when you're a worker, it's that it's harder to get to the point of moving on, because it's like, yeah, I have no idea who I am or what my purpose is, um outside of that. I'm completely starting from scratch. And so there is a sense in which I'm feel very much floundering in an undefinable space. But I think, like, this, you mentioned, like, this spiritual direction training that I'm in is a way of trying to find my way
Mm.
forward into something else. Like as I've thought about what is salvageable from my life's experience, um, like what gets thrown away and what gets kept, and I think it was, um, sitting with the stories of survivors was some of the most meaningful uh, time I ever spent, and maybe through just gut instinct and maybe luck, I was I was able to hold space for that in a safe way that um, others felt validated and helped by that, and I think it led me into this of um, maybe realizing it's not just us two by twos going through this. Like a lot of people are um, experiencing the collapse of everything else, everything they thought they ever knew or believed in, and the existential crisis that can follow. And how do you um, sit with someone in that in a way that's helpful without some kind of conversion agenda, like here, let me fix you. Here, let me tell you what to believe. Like, here, let me tell you all the right answers. Um, so anyway, anyway, I don't.
So I had to react. Sorry, want to react to a couple of things you said there.
Yeah.
One of them is that one of the fears that a lot of people have had that were born and raised in the church is the idea that because you grew up in this very rigid framework, you never had a chance, or it was very stifled to kind of explore who you are and what you're about. And so feeling like very scared, like I can't go back to that age. It was removed, and so like how do I figure out how do I move forward, kind of in an authentic way? And I think one of the things that we can, yeah, express, for your reality is that you left the church because of who you were. Like it was pushing against your innate values, and
Mm.
and you were forced to either compromise those values or leave. And you chose to leave. And I feel like that's a really strong indicator that actually who you are, at least at some level, is very much intact, even though
Hmm.
you were born and raised in that framework. Um, I think the other thing that, when you talked about I was just a guy that was willing to mouth off, I think the reason why that voice held up so, like so many people wanted to hear a voice is because it represented one of the few voices of conscience that everybody was feeling like this is wildly wrong. And yet nobody in the ministry, hardly, with the exception of you
Hmm.
and Greg and a few others, were like, yeah, I feel the same. Like this is wildly wrong and angering, and that, but yet so few willing to break through the rules to challenge that and express that. And so it was like a voice of the it was a voice of the community's conscience that was largely lacking, and certainly from the overseers, like not willing to actually acknowledge with any kind of depth that, wow, yeah, we this is all went totally sideways, and we didn't handle this well at all throughout history, and certainly not recently as
Hmm.
well. And so that, I certainly just speak for myself. That's why your voice carried a lot of weight, is because it was like, I'm not crazy here. Like,
Hmm.
no, there's other people
Yes.
feeling the same way, that this is just wildly unconscionable, and others feel that way. I'm not just losing my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And others' voices did the same for me. Yeah. Um, yeah. The feeling like I'm not crazy, and and it seemed really important. Just the message that, like, hey, you don't have to keep doing this. Like, you don't have to remain a part of this whole thing. And um, I don't know what to tell you after that. There's a lot to figure out on the other side of that, but just to feel assured, like you don't have to stay in this for the rest of your life. You're not under any obligation from God or anything else. um, if you're willing to take on that challenge of navigating your way out, you're still a good person, or you're not a you're not a failure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly a feeling that a lot of people have, and that was ingrained. Like these people that left, they couldn't handle what God wanted, and they'll hopefully eventually be able of it. And that was true for even some of my siblings of feeling like they were failures because they just didn't do it, and then having left for years and still feeling like, well, eventually I'll have to figure it out, figure out how to make it work. And yeah, it's a huge relief even to them to be like, oh, this isn't something that I need to worry about anymore. That is not. There wasn't something figured out here. This was a construct that clearly had some major problems. So I want to dig into that a little bit. So one of the things that people, one of the things that you have to deal with in deconstructing when you leave a church that has this narrative that we've got it all figured out. We are the one true way, and we are the ultimate truth. Like that's, especially when you're born into that certainty, it's pretty helpful to frame life in a very simplistic way. Like I don't have to, all this messy grayness of life and society, like I don't have to worry about that. I can just be la la la. I don't care, because I've got it figured out. I'm one of the fortunate few to got this figured out. But inside this construct, you also have your own questions. Like, well, yeah, I mean, we've got it all figured out, but then I have these questions, and when I try to get answers for them, they're just like, well, that's you're showing you don't have the right faith, because the faith we have doesn't question these things, right? The faith that questions not. And one of the things I was reflecting on when I was 12, I was in an accident, and I was out cold and not breathing, and I had to be resuscitated. And in that time, I had a very distinct memory of that experience, and I don't know if you really classify it as a near-death experience, but it was in that category. And I remember very well this feeling of being in this room, this giant room with lots of people around, not people that I knew, and none of it really was significant, other than this feeling that I had that I didn't have any questions. And it's not that I had all the answers, but I didn't have any more questions. And for a long time, I thought of that of like it was a gift from God to help me understand a taste of what heaven is like. Like it's a space of not having these unanswered questions. And that may be true. I don't know. But I've also thought, well, there's another way to frame that, which is that I was in my brain, I had lots of questions that I wasn't allowed to question. I wasn't allowed to process. And in what my body thought might be my final moments, it could have been my brain saying, okay, I'm going to flush that. I'm going to create a sensation so I can pass peacefully, that I don't need these answers. They are not important. And it's an interesting experience to kind of reflect on, having learned some things about like the why we do things. And you're doing some training that involves Brittany Hartley, and she gets into why the value of these simplistic answers in respect to our brain's capacity. And so we live in this information age where we have like a godlike view of the world, where we can know when a war breaks out across the world and horrific things happening. And we're not built for that. We're not built to take in like just the horrors of the whole planet all at once, right? And so like what the church did was that, well, and this is scriptural, like God's gonna make it all just in the end. And so unfortunately what that would mean for a lot of people, and it would be like, well, and we see this even with the worker, the overseer's handling of the survivors, is like, we don't need to deal with it or anything else because God will make it just. So it's not on us to deal with, and that that framing is really convenient, and you can understand it from a standpoint of like, if they feel like overwhelmed, I can't do anything about this anyway. Like I don't know how to go about it. If I do try, there's all these complications. I get all these pressures to not do anything about it, which I'm sure they're getting. Like it's a really convenient way to frame the world, but the way Brittany frames it is like that's an emotion, that's a sign of emotional immaturity of like, I have to live in this black and white world because I can't handle all the grays of life. And I'm curious, like, as you've gone into this training, that world of like, I'm going to adopt very simplistic religious answers so that I can do spiritual bypass and not worry about these things and not even think about them. I have my answers, I'll just frame the world in this black and white framing, even though it's, I know in reality it's not that black and white, but I'm going to go ahead and frame it that way. Like, that's opening a Pandora's box, and I think we're all kind of in that situation, and people navigate in different ways. How do you think about that, and your training in this area of like, okay, I don't get to just excuse, create these very simple narratives that, and then I don't think about them anymore.
Yeah. Um, I I think it was also Britt that made a video about um, you kind of have to develop this ability to dynamically um, shrink and expand your the amount of suffering you're able to hold. Like, you kind of have to shrink your world at times, um, just to collect yourself and not maybe consider that to be a moral failure, that t- to be able to separate out the difference between spiritual bypassing and trying to um, establish some amount of existential health and well-being and resilience enough that you can um, deal effectively and helpfully with the world as it really is, to actually face up to the world as it actually is. Um, and that, yeah, that takes time to learn how to do that. I think um, there if you decide I'm not going to escape into spiritual bypassing, there is there is the possibility of just getting crushed under all the suffering in the world, and or just whatever they call it, compassion fatigue,
Mhm.
or um, whatever. Um, I think personally, I I still like times of quiet contemplation. I don't I don't refer to it as prayer in my mind, but to just, whether it's, you know, 30 seconds or an hour or more of just maybe um like, not, maybe you could call it some kind of radical acceptance, where it's like everything just is what it is right now, and I'm gonna pause from reacting to any of it for a while, and just um that, what, injustice, inequality, cruelty, hatred, needless suffering, um what would appear to be completely unnecessary suffering, it's all exists in the world. um, but there's also innocence and happiness and laughter, and somewhere somebody feels loved in the world. Um, the processes that allow for terrible things to happen also allowed for me to become alive in the first place. And I maybe just instead of trying to make sense of it, it just notice that it is what it is for a little while. Um, I don't know, something about being able to breathe with that for a little bit gives you some kind of strength. I'm speaking very personally, but some kind of strength to say, okay, what do I want my contribution to be, and on what scale? And yeah, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that I think is inherent in what you talked about, the shrinking or expanding that scope, is that we never had that concept of we get to choose that narrative. We get to pick that narrative of what these bigger things mean, what's the bigger picture. That was predefined for us, even though it wasn't explained very well. You kind of had to accept somebody else's perspective of what that is. And one of the big gifts has been that you get to, each individual one gets to define their own personal answers that maybe evolve, um, and they may be faith-based, that they can be, may not be, but how we shrink or expand that world to where our brains can actually take it on and feel comfortable and feel it, at peace with how we're choosing to exist. That is a new concept, right? That we get to
Yes.
embrace.
Yes. Um, yeah, there's a tremendous freedom in that, and it is like a permission you have to give yourself at some point. Um, like, yeah, s- somebody else sat and thought about who or what they thought God was, and then they talked with other people about it, and um, somehow certain ideas got settled on long before we were born, even, and those got handed to us. But to give yourself permission, like, I can just sit with my own lived experience and ponder over who do I think what or if God is, um, or what, um, kind of to tell the story of your life to yourself in a new way, and how you how you fit into it, and how you're going to write the last chapters, um, without any feelings of obligation toward what the old script was, is pretty tremendous.
Yes, I wanted to kind of dig in on that a little bit about just kind of, you know, I think about one of the things that I question for myself, is where I spend my energy, in kind of moving forward. And one of the things that I spend a lot of my time on is with the efforts of Bridget and Balm and the broader efforts for the community. And I've struggled with that because it's like, why is that community and the harm more important than all the other causes, that are out there, for that also are very worthy? Like last night I was at an event where they're raising money for, children with terminal illnesses, and it was a hospital that handles that, takes care of it, so that parents with children that are going to die, that they don't have to bear the cost of that, and they'll hold the trauma at the same time. It's like, wow, that's a really worthwhile cause. And I've questioned in my mind, like, is this another form of exclusivity that I'm motivated to help this particular need, even though there's lots of needs around me. And and one of the things that I felt like one of the things I do appreciate about Jesus framing love your neighbor is a way to shrink the world. Like we our world's huge now. And so like the church shrunk it really small. Like your neighbor was basically people you went to meetings with, and your charity was helping the workers out. Like it was so small that it was like kind of ridiculous. Now, not all the friends felt that way, but I felt that way. I was like, well, I'm helping these homeless workers. That's the charity. That is my neighbor and literally the people that need the help. Now it's like it's gotten huge. Like my the whole world in some way is my neighbor. And it's overwhelming, and it's also hard to grapple with. And so yeah, I figured that, well, this is more of the exclusivity mentality of like, well, this is still the most important community to try to help. And the way I've framed it is that no, that's not. It's maybe the need that I'm most uniquely positioned to help with. Like, yes, there's lots of great causes, and I could have put my energy into that. Can I make the most difference here? And for now, that seems like that's true. Um, but I think that's that is one concept that I've really hung on to, is that if I see myself as a good citizen, which is important to me, um, my helping out my neighbor might mean I'm still helping a charity in Africa because my neighbor has some connections there or whatever. But I need to shrink the world to where I'm making an impact, or I'm living my life in a way that makes sense without just blowing up and getting so big that I can't handle it. Like I'm curious, how you react to that kind of same framing, because you have had to pull back. Like you were out there very vocal, and now you're like, wow, I'm I don't know if you're overwhelmed, but you're also like, I have to kind of think about where I put my energy, like what makes the most sense to me now as I move forward. And you've got your family, you're trying to figure out your career and all these things to navigate. Like,
Yeah. I I think my choice to do this training was my way of shrinking my world, because it wasn't just a choice to do one thing. It was 1,000 choices of what not to do
mm-hmm,
at the same time. Um, and yeah, that was my way of maybe what's a contribution I can I can make, based on the needs of the world that I'm aware of. And but yeah, as far as um, it's interesting how um, maybe this the sword has two edges, I guess.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes when you call something out really hard, you eventually end up wondering if you're guilty of the thing you're calling out.
mm,
Um, and But as far as what you're doing, like I could just say from my perspective, it's it's a I would think it would be a huge thing to receive help from someone where you feel like they also understand
mm-hmm.
what what to some extent what you've gone through, um, and there's um, I mean there's healing in that, in addition to whatever financial support or whatever. Um, so yeah, and wow, for myself, I just I really appreciate like people in the X2x2 community who have stayed engaged with the thing, because I felt like I did. I kind of collapsed from exhaustion at some point, and or felt like even if I had the strength, I'm just not in a position to help in a lot of ways, because I got to go figure myself out. Um, and so, yeah, it's kind of this toss up between, like you talked about earlier, not wanting to just be defined as an X2 by 2, but it's when you're aware of needs that exist in that community, it's worth maybe staying adjacent to it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Crystal's been modeling this um, incredible energy that I think most of us don't have, um, to really keep the dialogue and the support moving forward. I want to shift gears a little bit to kind of come back to this idea of like um, kind of discovery, you know, your kind of self discovery and figuring out how to move forward. There's a writer on Substack that I follow, Elisa Hurd, who reads, I think her topic is called Religious Trauma Field Notes. And she's a former Pentecostal minister. Um, but she wrote recently that about the entire grooming that happens. Like we've been trained about grooming of predators, sexual abuse predators, but that she writes that the reality is the entire community is groomed in a certain way to kind of make sure the system is stable and supported. And that's the thing I think that's become really obvious of like how defensive the system is and how people have like turned off their critical thinking and turned off even willing to listen, and they're adopt narratives like they're all lies, and you know, like these really simplistic views of like zero curiosity. And to see that play out of like, oh, the whole community has been groomed to react this way and in a very defensive way. And she talks about like when you are new to the community, you get love bombed, and that draws you in. But as somebody that grew up in it, that's it's no longer something you experience as new, and that gives you a sense of belonging. But that was just environmental. That's the way the environment that you expected, and it was normalized, and it's a coercive like
mm,
effect on you. And so that all you know is this coercive behavior that is normalized for you. And um, one of the things she writes about is that it makes you, you know, such community is susceptible to coercive elements everywhere because
mm,
you don't recognize them. They're normalized. You don't see them. And I'm curious. I feel like well, the other thing, like one more thing, she talks about like leadership roles are a way for the system to reinforce itself. So um, you you moved into a leadership role as a worker, and that was an empowering experience. I would expect. Um, but she says in reality, it's a framing that is it's conditioning to protect the institution. That became your role, is to protect the institution, and so I'm curious, like how you've processed like what happened, like how do I back away from these coercive elements and understand like these were things imputed on me that I have to now reframe and understand, like how to not have that happen
mm,
again, like how do I make sure I'm not susceptible to coercion in others, because they're rampant in politics, they're rampant in cultures, and they're rampant
mm,
in businesses. Like you don't want to. I know that for me personally. Like I don't want to be subject to these coercive behaviors and get sucked in again. How do you feel about like what you've learned that allows you to recognize these patterns, even though they were normalized and very much inborn for you?
mm. Yeah. Um, I um, I don't I don't know if um, I've spent enough time to really be comfortable with like the language, maybe like say like the way she spelled it out in a clear way, and that I've sat with that long enough to um, kind of lay it out clearly in my mind when I see it. I think I just recognize a familiar feeling of something that I saw play out before, and it's like, oh, this kind of feels like that. um, like um, I'll just I'll give you an example of something like one of my last years in the work, and I want to be very vague because I want to respect people's privacy. But someone was I was responsible in the field. I was the older worker, and um, someone was coming to gospel meetings, and who we would consider to be an unlikely candidate, you might say. And really looking back on the experience, it was from a 2x2 perspective, it was one of those platform stories that you would not believe was actually true. It was like this dream scenario of someone coming and came all year to our gospel meetings, and then at the convention they professed. But when I look back now, the entire local community of friends, um, without coaching and without coordination on the side, um, there was this highly efficient grooming process that took place as a community, like just through pure instinct and just through familiarity with the way our group operated. There was this whole love bombing process and grooming, to bring someone into the fold, and of course, we were all convinced that that was, the Holy Spirit guiding each one of us. But and it just felt the whole thing felt like just a blessing from God. That's the way we would all be interpreting it at the time. But this person professed at convention, and people were weeping, and people were elated, and I was stoic, and I couldn't understand why. I was saying to myself, like, what is wrong with me? Like this is a once in a lifetime experience, um, and why aren't you like overjoyed for this person, to come out of such unlikely circumstances and find their way into salvation? And I couldn't make sense of it to myself, my lack of feeling. And I spoke to them afterward, um, and later they told me, they said, well, at first, while we were still in the church, they said, like, when you came up to talk to me, I just thought, well, Jared must be way up here and I'm just down here, because like I didn't get at all what you were saying, you know. And I don't remember what I said. I think I was trying to tamp down expectations, though. Like, like you don't fly high for very long before you're back down to earth. And but then after we're both out post 2023 and talking about it, this person was like you felt something. It was kind of like you were almost like you were warning me. And it made more sense to me then, like that I knew none of us were being truthful with that person about what was really expected. Like you say, this whole grooming process, like someone's signing up for a lot more than what's been presented on the surface. And those expectations are coming for you eventually. And I knew that. And I was feeling protective of the person, like, um I I wanted them to have a freedom that I had never had within the group. Um so I mean, that to me, that's a prime example of um maybe everything that she wrote about just actually happening, just on display. Um, and so, having lived that, I think maybe it's just um, sometimes you just see like that feels familiar, like this behavior that I'm seeing, or this group that seems to be a cohesive unit, but what's behind it um, feels like something I want to just pull back from for whatever reason. Um, and maybe that's why I'm searching for a way to be a one person business. It's just I'm so gun shy. Uh, yeah, I don't know.
We have a question in the chat.
Hmm.
If Jared, were you born and raised? And I think you're third generation, third or fourth generation.
Yes, fourth generation. Yeah. My great grandparents um, met Jack Carroll in 1912 in Washington State. Yeah.
So you kind of tangentially reference. I'm curious. So I wrote about the terms and conditions of
Yes.
professing,
Yes.
and it was interesting to see the reaction. You weren't on Facebook. You're not on Facebook these days.
No.
But the reactions were pretty interesting. Like for a lot of people, like it was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But there were some that were clearly still in the church. They were like, it's not true at all. It's not what I understood. And it was really interesting to just be like, and then I've heard from others that are still in the church, like, yeah, it's pretty accurate. It's fascinating to hear the different reactions. The people that reacted strongest were the ones that are like, no, I get to decide what the terms and conditions are. That wasn't my terms and conditions. And I don't care if the worker is imputed on me that there's these other terms and conditions, or they're not even imputing that on it. And it does seem like there are people who have held the church a lot more loosely than we were able to as people
Hmm.
born and raised, or it's just their personalities that, like when you're coerced to fit in so much, like you don't feel like the liberty to, when somebody puts expectations on you, with typically usually a worker or a parent, you don't feel like, no, I'm not, I decide I'm not going to buy that into that. And so I'm curious, like how did you react to those kind of written in that, the terms that I understood them, in kind of a different language.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I maybe if some of them, since I don't have them in front of me, but some of them I felt like maybe it was slightly more nuanced than the way it was stated, but that's pretty much what it amounts to. And I I think we did hide behind that a lot. Is like, well, we don't say that. Like, we don't say this is the only way that's right. But it's just it's so baked into the culture that we don't have to say it out loud. And so um and I think people um people try to say, well, it's not really like that. Like, we don't tell people they have to do this and this, or they're going to be expected to do this. But um we don't call it out or shout it down when those things are on occasion explicitly stated. Um, just let it stand, and we don't try to dial back, these cultural expectations or the um, say like, oh, there's no dress code when everyone shows up looking identical. Like, um, I think, that was something we realized in 2023 was like, I, there, if you invite someone brand new to a gospel meeting, there is nothing I can say in that meeting to overcome the impression of seeing the appearance of every female in that meeting. Like that's what that's the message they're going to get. There's nothing I can say. Um, I can't. There's no amount of eloquence that I can have about Jesus and the perfect, pure gospel and express it as brilliantly as it's ever been said. That's going to overcome what they're looking at when they first walk in the building. Um, so to pretend those things don't exist is, yeah, it's a stretch.
Yeah, so there are four tenets so the one of them is that, yeah, the one true exclusive source of salvation. And it's interesting, like I feel like it's a cop out because usually when I've heard that, like, well, we don't know for the one true way. Like the way that's usually framed is, well, maybe there's something like similar that we don't know about, and they follow the same pattern, and so that's why we don't know. But nobody's gonna say like, well, some workers will, but like people be saved in other churches, like it's that have a different practice, like that is it's really hard, I would think, as a worker to be like, yeah, that could be possible. But like, well, why are you called to this ministry that's so severe relative to the all the others if they're like fine too? Especially when the foundation from people like Jack Carroll was very much like all these churches are wrong, and that's why we even started this church is because they're wrong. So like that is the history, and it feels super disingenuous to be like, no, we don't actually
Yeah.
believe that. Like that's literally why the church exists. And then the non-transferability of it is like yeah, like some pushbacks, like, well, people go to other churches and they, maybe have fellowship with other people. It's like, yeah, that's an evangelizing. It's not actually like you're not going there generally to participate in as like the broader body of Christ. Now, maybe some people do that, but that's generally not accepted behavior. It's considered dangerous. Like, no, you might lose your revelation and get influenced by their deception. And then the revocable status, like the fact that the workers decide, you can't take part in a meeting. Like I never thought about the time, but that means like you're not saved. Like if you can't take part in a meeting, what's the message being told? Like you have to fix this or you're lost, right? Like I don't know how else you wouldn't internalize that. Like I was never in that position, and so I never really thought about, well, what does it mean to be asked not to take part? But I would think that's very much a judgment on the state of their salvation. And then last one is the submission of spiritual authority. Like that's what I feel like I didn't really get until recently, which was like I didn't have a voice. Like I was pushing like we need to behave differently as a church with respect to this crisis. And it didn't matter. Like what I had to say and what anybody, like literally these very influential people in the church, far more than any voice that I have, it didn't matter. We saw that, and that we saw that play out with the Maryland safety team, Maryland and Virginia, but like they didn't have a voice, and so like
And that,
yeah, like you can say it's not true that the workers don't expect the submission of their authority, but that's how it plays out when there's any
no,
kind of
it's,
conflict.
yeah. Yeah. And that goes back to the grooming, like that everyone's been groomed. And in fact, it's this endless cycle of where we took turns grooming each other almost because we didn't know that's what we were doing. Um, like the community kind of grooms everyone in it, but that was when it, it's like hitting a brick wall at full speed to realize, oh, like I can't overcome, um, the grooming. Like I can't, there's not words that I can speak that can overcome that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, those things exist. When you were talking, I thought of something, and I'm trying to think of that. Oh, yeah, like just that you have to be in this to be saved idea. Like, I was confronted with that at one point when, someone in our area married someone that was Christian, but not, not born and raised in the church. And they told their spouse to just go ahead and start taking part in meeting. So the professing spouse was acknowledging them as a saved Christian. And the people in the meeting just flew flew off the handle. And then it fell to me, and yeah, I had to, and I did not, um I did not do well in that situation. Like, um I kind of ended up settling on the party line, like the, and it was like hiding behind the whole, you have to enter as a child, like, kind of thing. But I mean, it was basically, I had to decide, like, we don't acknowledge people outside of this as true Christians, um, who are free to participate along with us in our fellowship. Like, they've got to demonstrate that they've gone through the grooming process and come out indoctrinated just like the rest of us.
Get their
um,
termed gained their understanding. Yeah.
and I mean, I think that proves it too. Like, you, where in the church does someone just casually invite, their coworker to come have fellowship and take part in a meeting, and they're they've been sincerely participating in what they know to be Christianity their entire lives. Like, we got no use for that, or we had no use for that. Um, so it's just gaslighting language. I think people try to say, no, we're not like that. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. The actions are very in contrast
yeah,
to dismissing it. All right. Well, we've rambled for almost an hour. Is there
okay.
any questions anybody has in the chat, or well, they might be all asleep.
Yeah. Huh.
I think there's like a 15-second delay or something, so they think they might not hear us yet. But anyway, so um,
Okay.
well, I hope you get feeling better. Sounds like you're on the mend.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, it's
think
coming along. Yeah.
thanks for being willing to will you address a boundary? Sorry, Kristen, I don't know what that question means. Okay, I'll see if she clarifies.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for doing this. And
Yeah.
oh, sorry. As in, how could one hold a boundary when one had to? Oh, so you did. I think she's talking about when, like, telling people not to take part in meeting. And I think as I understood it, you basically did confront the person, say, sorry, you have to profess before you can take part in meeting to this spouse.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I did my own gaslighting language that in that instance, I think, but I held that line essentially. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I experienced this where someone was asked not to take part in my union meeting, and I was not happy with it. It was somebody that was living with um, in a situation that wasn't approved. They weren't married, living together, and when I later addressed it with the sister worker who had brought down the message that you can't take part while you're in this situation. Um, when I asked her about, like, hey, I don't agree with you, it's like, yeah, I don't either, but it's not my decision.
Just the way it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like this comes from on high. And it was it's like here I'd been going to meetings for years and years, and like, really, that's how this works. This is you're the field workers don't actually have the authority to, and maybe you had more authority, like, but if you go against the party line, like
Well,
it's a problem.
well, that goes back to the grooming. People groomed for leadership positions. Is I really wasn't in that position until I was kind of indoctrinated to the point where I could be relied on to kind of uphold the institution or the party line. And there's definitely that um that yeah, like, do I want to take on the entire church by making this decision, like by supporting that person and say, yeah, I say you go ahead and take part, and you don't ever have to profess in a meeting like you're a full-blown Christian along with the rest of us. Just um I mean, to have said that, I was just um going to bring down a sea of heavier hands, you know. Um, so it's kind of an impossible situation.
Yeah, yeah, you become the renegade. All right, I don't see any more questions, but yeah, some folks saying they appreciate the appreciate you, Jared.
Yeah, well,
Sharing your Sunday morning and sharing your progress, and hopefully this helpful in some ways to people trying to navigate how they move forward, and maybe most helpful that it's a struggle for all of us.
yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks to anyone who endured all my rambling.
uh,
Oh,
yeah. All right. Well, have a great day, and yeah, we'll talk again.
all right. Thanks.